A bold invitation to the world's most feared leader and African president, defying the West, and a visit that could change the future of Africa forever. But what happens when the world threatens war over one man's journey to Burkina Faso? In the heart of Ouagadougou, the capital of Burkina Faso, President Ibrahim Traore sat in his office thinking deeply. The country had suffered for too long under foreign influence, from colonial powers to international corporations that drained Africa's resources. The revolution, which started with Thomas Sankora's vision, had to continue. For Ibrahim, the fight for sovereignty was not just political, it was deeply personal. He knew that Africa had been treated like a pawn on the global chessboard for too long, and he had made it clear that Burkina Faso would no longer play by anyone's rules. His country would determine its own future, and if that meant taking risks, Ibrahim was ready to take them one day. As he was looking over reports on Burkina Faso's relationships with other nations, an idea came to him, a bold, unconventional idea. Why not invite Kim Jong-un, the leader of North Korea, to Burkina Faso? This would not only send a powerful message about Africa's unity with other countries resisting imperialism, but would also help solidify Burkina Faso's position in the world as a nation that refused to be pushed around. Kim Jong-un had been a symbol of resistance to the West for years. His defiance of U.S. sanctions and military threats had earned him the respect of leaders in the developing world, especially those who, like Ibrahim, understood what it was like to fight for independence. Kim Jong-un's visit would not only highlight Burkina Faso's refusal to bow to foreign powers, but it could also spark a wave of solidarity among African nations with conviction. Ibrahim Traore sent the invitation to Kim Jong-un, officially asking him to be the first North Korean president to visit Africa, and specifically Burkina Faso. To Ibrahim, this was more than just a diplomatic gesture. It was a declaration that Africa was no longer a continent to be ignored or controlled. Africa was taking its place on the world stage, and Burkina Faso was leading the charge. Within days, the news of the invitation spread like wildfire. It shocked the world. The idea of North Korea's leader visiting Africa seemed impossible to many, especially considering the global tensions surrounding Kim Jong-un's regime. But to those who understood the deeper implications of this invitation, it was a sign that Africa was no longer a bystander in global politics. Ibrahim Traore knew the risks of this move. The West, particularly the United States, was unlikely to be pleased. They had been pressuring African leaders to distance themselves from North Korea, citing the dangers of aligning with a regime that had nuclear ambitions. But Ibrahim believed that the time for fear was over. Africa needed to stand together, united in its pursuit of freedom and dignity, and that meant forming unexpected alliances. Kim Jong-un's response came sooner than expected. He accepted the invitation, and the world gasped in disbelief. The first North Korean president to ever visit Africa would be arriving in Ouagadougou. Soon as the excitement began to build in Burkina Faso, so did the concern from the West. The United States and its allies began to voice their disapproval, warning Ibrahim Traore that such an invitation could have dangerous consequences. There were whispers of military intervention, diplomatic isolation, and even economic sanctions if the visit went forward. The stakes were high, and the pressure was mounting. But for Ibrahim, the decision was clear. Burkina Faso had made a stand, and it was a stand he was not willing to abandon. This visit could change the course of Africa's future, and he would do whatever it took to ensure Kim Jong-un's arrival. As preparations began for the historic visit, one question lingered in the air: would the world allow it to happen, or would the forces of imperialism try to stop it before it even began? As the news of Kim Jong-un's acceptance of Ibrahim Traore's invitation spread, the world reacted with shock and uncertainty. The United States and France, along with other Western powers, made their disapproval clear. They sent messages to the government of Burkina Faso warning that allowing the North Korean leader to step foot on African soil would not be without consequences. There were whispers of sanctions, threats of diplomatic isolation, and even covert operations to prevent the visit from taking place. But Ibrahim Traore was resolute. He knew that the visit could bring more than just attention to Burkina Faso, it could be a turning point. For Africa as a whole in the quiet moments in his office with the weight of the world's pressure pressing down on him, he thought about the revolution, and what stood for Sankara's dream was alive in him. This wasn't just about one man's visit, it was about Africa's unity, Africa's independence. The time had come to step out from the shadows of colonialism and imperialism. However, despite Ibrahim's determination, there were deep concerns over the security of the visit. Kim Jong-un's arrival in Burkina Faso would not be a simple diplomatic gesture. The world was watching, and with North Korea's complicated relationship with the West, tensions ran high. The United States in particular had made it clear that they would not tolerate Kim Jong-un traveling through Africa without significant repercussions. Ibrahim and his advisors were well aware of the risks. The question wasn't just about inviting Kim Jong-un, it was about ensuring his safety. To his credit, Kim Jong-un had come prepared. His delegation, along with his own personal security team, included a specially equipped military airplane, one capable of carrying nuclear missiles for defense. The message was clear: if the West tried to arrest him or intervene in any way, it could escalate to a global conflict. As the visit drew nearer, Ibrahim met with his closest military and security advisors. They discussed contingency plans in case things went awry. The last thing Ibrahim wanted was to see Burkina Faso pulled into an international crisis, but he wasn't willing to back down. He believed in the strength of his people and the power of unity, but he also knew that the eyes of the world were upon them. The safety of both the North Korean leader and Burkina Faso's sovereignty was at stake. The plan was simple: ensure that the visit took place without interference. Kim Jong-un would arrive, and his safety would be secured by both North Korean and Burkina Faso forces. The rest of the world could protest, but they wouldn't stop this moment from happening. Kim's arrival in Ouagadougou was set for early next month, and the government moved swiftly to secure the capital. Military units were placed on high alert, and city streets were cleared for the delegation. The excitement in Burkina Faso was palpable. The people were excited to witness history, a moment that would forever change the narrative of Africa's place in the world. But as the preparations continued, Western diplomats increased their pressure. They sent private messages to Ibrahim warning him of the consequences of hosting Kim Jong-un. They made it clear that this visit would damage Burkina Faso's relationships with the West, that sanctions would follow, and that there would be serious diplomatic consequences. Ibrahim was faced with a dilemma: would he allow Burkina Faso to be bullied by foreign powers, or would he stand firm in his commitment to African sovereignty? In a meeting with his closest allies, Ibrahim Traore made his decision clear: we cannot allow ourselves to be pawns any longer, he said, his voice filled with resolve. This visit is more than just a moment for us, it is a statement to the world that Africa is free, that Africa will stand on its own, and if they try to stop us, we will not back down. We will show them that we are not afraid of the consequences. The preparations for Kim Jong-un's arrival continued despite the escalating tension. Burkina Faso's people rallied behind their president, many seeing the visit as a sign of strength, a step forward in their fight for a future free of outside influence. The streets of Ouagadougou were filled with anticipation, and as the world held its breath, one thing was certain: this visit would mark a new chapter in the history of Africa and its relationships with the global powers. The final days before Kim's arrival were filled with both excitement and anxiety. Would the visit go smoothly, or would the threat of war hang over the event like a shadow in the midst of the uncertainty? One thing was clear: President Ibrahim Traore was prepared to face whatever came next. As the day of Kim Jong-un's arrival drew closer, tensions escalated. The air in Ouagadougou was thick with anticipation. Citizens spoke excitedly on the streets about the unprecedented visit, while government officials worked around the clock to ensure security. The city had never experienced such a significant diplomatic event, and the mood was a mixture of pride and anxiety. This visit wasn't just about Kim Jong-un, it was about the very future of Burkina Faso and even the wider African continent. The whole world was watching. The streets of the capital were transformed for the occasion military. Checkpoints were established, roads were cleared, and the nation's security apparatus was put on high. Alert President Ibrahim Traore had called for unity, urging the people to show the world that Africa could stand on its own terms, free from the control of foreign powers. It was a historic moment, and the country needed to prove that was more than just the sum of its challenges. But as preparations were underway, the international community was in uproar. The United States and its allies ramped up their rhetoric. They made it clear that the visit was unacceptable and that they would not stand idly by. The threat of sanctions, political isolation, and military intervention loomed, but Ibrahim remained unmoved. He was not prepared to let Burkina Faso be bullied into submission, not after everything the country had endured. He had already made it clear that he would not back down, and his resolve was unshakable. The discussions with Kim Jong-un's team about security became more intense. The North Korean leader had his own security detail, a unit trained to protect him at all costs. Kim's personal plane, equipped with nuclear weapons for defense, was a clear signal to the world that he would not be threatened. There was an unspoken understanding that if the United States or any of its allies attempted to disrupt the visit, they would be dealing with far more than a diplomatic issue. They would be facing the real possibility of a conflict. As the day of the visit approached, military strategists in Burkina Faso met daily with Kim's security team to ensure that every possible contingency was covered. The plan was clear. Kim Jong-un would land in Ouagadougou and be safely escorted through the city with airspace tightly controlled and military units on standby. Ibrahim Traore knew that this visit was the culmination of everything he had worked for, and he was determined that nothing would derail it. At the same time, President Traore had to remain mindful of the diplomatic fallout. The United States, with its enormous influence on the global stage, had made its position clear. The world was at a tipping point, and the repercussions of this visit could have far-reaching consequences for Burkina Faso and Africa as a whole. In a private meeting with his inner circle, Ibrahim once again reaffirmed his stance. "This is bigger than us," he said. "This is a moment for all of Africa. We will not let them dictate our future. If we have to stand alone, we will, but we are not backing down. This is a message to the world that Africa is no longer a pawn. It is a player." The day finally arrived, and the world held its breath as Kim Jong-un's plane landed in Ouagadougou. The streets were lined with citizens, many of whom had never imagined they would witness such a historical moment. The security surrounding Kim was tight, but it was clear that the world's attention was on Burkina Faso. If anything went wrong, the fallout could be catastrophic. As Kim Jong-un disembarked from his plane, President Ibrahim Traore was there to meet him, standing tall and proud. The two leaders exchanged greetings, but the weight of the moment was felt by all present. It was a handshake that sent shock waves across the globe. The world had been waiting for something to go wrong, but for now all was calm. Ibrahim Traore was keenly aware that this moment could be fleeting. If anything went wrong, if any outside force tried to intervene, it could lead to disaster. The world was on edge. The risk of military confrontation hung in the air like a heavy cloud, but for now the moment was his. As the motorcade made its way through the city with Kim Jong-un's military planes flying overhead, Ibrahim Traore couldn't help but reflect on how far Burkina Faso had come from a country once divided by colonialism and exploitation to a nation that was now standing shoulder to shoulder with a global power that defied Western influence. It was a moment of pride, a moment that would go down in history as one of the defining moments of African sovereignty. But Ibrahim knew this was only the beginning. The real work, the hard work, was still ahead. If this visit succeeded, it could open the door for more African nations to stand on their own terms. If it failed, it could set the entire continent back decades. Whatever happened, Ibrahim Traore would stand firm in his belief that Africa had a right to choose its own path. The next few days passed in a whirlwind of diplomacy, security meetings, and public appearances. The city of Ouagadougou was alive with excitement and tension. The people, though nervous, were proud to be part of something so momentous. They had Never seen anything like it. A leader from North Korea, the embodiment of defiance against Western powers, was walking their streets, meeting their president, and showing the world that Africa could chart its own course. It felt like a revolution within a revolution, but the tension in the air was undeniable. The Western world, particularly the United States, had made it clear that they viewed this visit as a direct challenge to their influence over Africa. The warnings had grown louder. The rhetoric from Washington, London, and Paris became more aggressive. Ibrahim Traore had already anticipated this, but even so, he couldn't ignore the possibility that the situation could spiral out of control at any moment. The stakes were higher than ever. The night after Kim Jong-un's arrival, a series of secretive meetings took place in the presidential palace. Ibrahim and his inner circle, along with Kim's security team, went over the details of the plan. Once again, the United States had yet to make any official moves, but there were rumors circulating that they might try to disrupt the visit through back channel means. Some diplomats in the region had even suggested a covert operation to arrest Kim, or at least stop the visit from continuing. Ibrahim Traore wasn't naive. He knew that the United States had the power to make things difficult for Burkina Faso, especially with its ties to France and the economic leverage it held over the African continent. But he also knew that the West could not control Africa forever. This visit, if successful, could mark the beginning of a new chapter for the continent. As Kim Jong-un's entourage moved through the streets of Ouagadougou, escorted by Burkina Faso security forces, the tension was palpable. They passed through the city, waving to the crowd, who cheered, some more enthusiastically than others. It was a complex moment, one that spoke to both the pride of Burkina Faso and the unease in the air. Would the West allow this visit to continue without interference? Would this peaceful moment explode into chaos? For the most part, the visit seemed to be going smoothly. Kim Jong-un and Ibrahim Traore met regularly, discussing the future of their countries and their vision for the continent. Kim, surprisingly, was not the cold, distant leader many had imagined. He was deeply interested in the struggles of African nations and seemed to genuinely appreciate what Burkina Faso was attempting to do. During their private conversations, he spoke about his admiration for the revolutionaries of Africa, particularly Sankara, and expressed a desire to strengthen ties with countries that shared his resistance to Western domination. However, the moment of calm was short-lived. Late one evening, as the two leaders were preparing for another meeting, word came from the security team that there had been an attempted attack on one of Kim's private vehicles. The assailants, it seemed, had been local mercenaries backed by a mysterious outside force. It wasn't long before the pieces of the puzzle started to fall into place. The attempt on Kim's life had been orchestrated by foreign powers who were trying to stop this visit at all costs. The realization it Ibrahim had the West had already begun to take measures to disrupt this moment, to sabotage Africa's attempt to break free from their grip. Ibrahim's initial anger turned to determination. This was no longer about just one leader's visit. This was about the fight for Africa's future. He couldn't allow this moment to be destroyed by those who sought to control the continent. The attack, though unsuccessful, was a wake-up call. It wasn't just a threat to Kim, it was a threat to the very ideals Ibrahim had spent his life fighting for. He met with his advisors and military leaders to discuss the next steps. The message was clear: there could be no turning back now. The revolution for African sovereignty had to be defended no matter the cost. Kim Jong-un, though shaken by the attempt on his life, insisted that he would continue the visit. He was a man who had built his reputation on resisting foreign pressure, and this moment he believed was just as important for North Korea as it was for Burkina Faso. His determination to stand with Ibrahim was evident, and it gave the president the strength to keep moving forward despite the growing threats around them. The next day, as Kim Jong-un and Ibrahim Traore stood together for a press conference, the weight of their words carried more than just diplomatic significance. It was a declaration of independence, a promise that Africa would not be cowed by the threats of outside forces. The two men spoke about the importance of self-determination, of building a world where African nations could stand together united without interference. from foreign powers, Burkina Faso and North Korea. Ibrahim Traore said with conviction, are standing together in defiance of imperialism. We refuse to be controlled. We refuse to be silenced. Africa's destiny is in our hands. Kim Jong-un added, what is happening in Burkina Faso is not just a victory for one country, it is a victory for all who seek independence from foreign domination. The world will see Africa rise. The press conference ended to applause, but the world was still watching. The clock was ticking, and the tension was building. The visit was far from over, and no one knew what the next day would bring. Would the West attempt to intervene again? Would the visit lead to war, or could it mark the beginning of something greater, something that would change the balance of power in Africa forever? As Ibrahim and Kim walked off the stage, the world held its breath. They had made it this far, but the journey ahead was uncertain, and the risks had never been higher. The battle for Africa's freedom had just begun. The day after the attempted attack on Kim Jong-un's vehicle, the atmosphere in Ouagadougou was charged with both determination and unease. The press conference had gone well, but the shadow of the assassination attempt loomed large. The world was watching, and the tension was only increasing. Ibrahim Traore knew that the attack was just the beginning. If the forces that tried to stop this visit were willing to resort to such drastic measures, they wouldn't hesitate to escalate. The security of Kim Jong-un was now more critical than ever. Ibrahim's loyalty to the principles of the revolution, self-determination, sovereignty, and independence was unwavering. He could not and would not allow Burkina Faso's independence to be threatened by anyone, not even the West. Late that night, Ibrahim met with his military and intelligence teams. His plan was clear. They would increase security around Kim's movements, but they would also make a statement to the world. They would not be intimidated. The revolution was far from over, and the world had to know that Burkina Faso would stand firm. Kim Jong-un had shown his commitment by staying in Burkina Faso, and now it was Ibrahim's turn to prove his resolve. He knew that this visit, though tense, was part of something much larger. It was the beginning of a new kind of diplomacy for Africa, one where African leaders would decide for themselves without the interference of external powers. The following day, as the streets of Ouagadougou buzzed with preparations for a major cultural event, Ibrahim decided to take Kim Jong-un on a tour of key areas in the city. He wanted to show his guests the spirit of Burkina Faso, how the people were united, how the spirit of Sankara still burned brightly in the hearts of the citizens. He also wanted to make a point to the world, no matter what forces tried to disrupt this moment, the people of Burkina Faso stood together in defiance of foreign pressure. As they traveled through the city, the crowds were cheering. The atmosphere was electric, with people waving flags, chanting for Africa's freedom, and showing their pride in their country's sovereignty. Kim Jong-un, despite the security concerns, seemed deeply moved by the welcome. His eyes softened as he watched the joy of the people around him for the first time. He could feel that this wasn't just a political visit, it was a solidarity movement, a shared struggle for freedom. But as the motorcade made its way through the streets, the peace was broken. Gunfire rang out in the distance, followed by explosions. A group of armed men, clearly organized and coordinated, had launched an attack on the convoy. The situation was chaotic, with soldiers and security teams scrambling to protect both Ibrahim and Kim. The crowd began to panic, and within moments the streets were filled with chaos. Ibrahim's security team immediately moved to shield Kim, while the military sprang into action to return fire. Kim's military personnel quickly deployed their own countermeasures, with their aircraft circling overhead for air support. The scene was tense, but both Ibrahim and Kim stood their ground. Amidst the chaos, Ibrahim and Kim's security team managed to take refuge in a nearby building. Ibrahim's calmness in the face of danger was striking. He had faced many challenges in his life, but this was unlike anything he had ever seen. The attack was a clear signal from outside forces. They would not allow this visit to continue without consequences. Once the immediate danger was dealt with and the situation stabilized, Ibrahim and Kim emerged from the building. The crowds were still shaken, but there was a feeling of triumph in the air. This attack had been meant to stop them, but it had only proven their resolve. The revolution would not be silenced. Ibrahim, in a show of defiance, addressed the people once more. "This is the price of freedom," he said, his voice steady and powerful. "We will not be intimidated. We will not bow to foreign powers who think they can control us. Today we stand with the people of Africa, and we stand with our brothers and sisters who fight for sovereignty." Kim Jong-un, standing beside him, nodded in agreement. "The world must see that Africa is not weak. This is a continent that will not be controlled. It is a continent that is rising, and nothing will stop it." The visit continued, but the attack had left a lasting impact. It wasn't just about Kim Jong-un's safety anymore. It was about the safety and security of every African nation that sought to stand free from the chains of foreign dominance. The message had been sent loud and clear. Africa was no longer the playground for imperial powers. It was a continent on the rise, one that would fight for its freedom no matter the cost. As the day came to a close, the sense of triumph was palpable. Despite the danger, despite the threats, the people of Burkina Faso had proven their strength. Ibrahim Traore had made it clear to the world Africa would no longer be silenced. The revolution, though threatened, would never die. The world had been watching, but the message was clear. Africa was no longer on the sidelines. The continent was ready to stand tall, to determine its own future, and nothing, not even the threat of war, could stop it. The visit of Kim Jong-un was more than just a diplomatic gesture. It was the beginning of a new chapter, one where Africa's voice would no longer be ignored. The revolution was alive, and it would never be stopped.